Okay, let's talk about the T-Wolves for a bit and really just give them their flowers for this season. Of course, Towns had 60 last night and he cooked my guy Jakob Pertl for a lot of it, picking pops, and then maybe he would pump fake and then drive past him, or there were a couple of like pump fakes into jab steps into a three in Pertl's face or whatever. Took him in the post sometimes. Zach Collins got some of this as well. The Wolves are now pretty comfortably in the seventh seed at worst. And they've got a chance to catch the Nuggets for the sixth seed. They're like 2.5 games back. And I want to talk about like how they opened up the season as a defensive team, and then eventually they kind of shifted their defensive schemes a little bit and became more of an offensive one lately, and the development of how people are playing off of Towns post-ups, and Jared Vanderbilt, who's definitely a role player all-star this year, and the culture that Patrick Beverley established and stuff, and Delo being an underrated passer on top of Edwards' growth as a player. But I do want to first talk about what we were talking about with this team at the beginning of the year, which was the whole thing about the owner or the president of basketball operations, whatever it was, just being fired like a couple of days before the season began or whatever, and it was like, oh, here we go again with the T-Wolves and all this mess. No, they got through that. Not only that, but this was the season in which we were fearful of, well, if this doesn't go well, looking at Karl Anthony Towns' contract situation, it could have been rough, but now I think it's safe to say we do not fear Karl Anthony Towns wanting out of Minnesota at all. So anyway, to talk about the team a little bit. So they opened up the season with a really aggressive defensive scheme. They were asking Towns to play much higher up on screens, and then it was basically a kind of a zoning up behind that, with D'Angelo Russell a lot of the time being the main communicator in the defense. And it really helped to have somebody like Jared Vanderbilt who could kind of dig into the paint for a moment to cut off any drives, but then also close out to the corner or sometimes even like all the way out to the top of the key if he really had to. Patrick Beverley helped out with this as well. And they were forcing so many turnovers early in the season. It was like an insane amount, right? And eventually I think teams just caught on to that, and okay, it's not easy to be an awesome defensive team for a whole season. And since then they've taken on a slightly safer approach to defense. I mean, there is still some switching. Like, I mean, in the last game they played against the Spurs, when Towns wasn't in the game, they were switching a lot of screens. When Towns was in there, it was a little bit more drop coverage, but they were also stepping him up more on screens against Miami a little bit. So it's not just an aggressive scheme all the time, and I think Chris Finch has done a good job of weathering the storm of the initial defensive thing falling off a little bit. The other thing that happened with them was, I think at some point, I mean, basically at the turn of the new year, they just became an amazing offensive team. And, I mean, this isn't the only thing, but I think some of it was incorporating more off-ball actions for Towns to get him in position to post up or whatever. Like, they'll have a screen for him along the baseline, and then he might run to the corner, and then that forces a switch, and then from there he can look to post up on that guy. Then the defense is scrambling because you're bringing two, and then somebody's open. And Towns might not even get the assist, but he is the beginning of that swing offense that eventually leads to something good, right? To mention Jared Vanderbilt again, I think because Towns is such a good shooter, it's made Vanderbilt's fit on offense work. I mean, Vanderbilt just doesn't shoot threes at all, which most power forwards today you can't say that about, and yet it's totally fine. To mention Edwards and Delo a little bit more, I mean, I remember Edwards' rookie season, the big thing was when Towns came back, he and Edwards could run a two-man game, and it just suddenly opened up a lot more things for Edwards because the other team actually had to respect Towns, you know? And now Edwards is running, I would say, a healthy amount of pick and roll. And sure, he's still got a daring shot selection that leads to your contested threes and whatever else it is. But for one, he has a good amount of nights where he makes a good amount of those threes. And it's like, oh crap, we can't do anything against this guy. But of course, we also all see just the downhill skills of the dude. I mean, the last video I made about the guy was he's got superstar potential. And in the case of Delo, the numbers would say he's having his best passing season. I think the eye test backs that up as well. I mean, he had a pass recently to like Naz Reid where it was from the top of the key and Naz Reid was essentially under the basket and he had to throw this perfect lob pass to get it over the defense. Is it safe to say he's having his best defensive season as well? Maybe it is. Also, the acquisition of Beverley, just taking some of that ball handling pressure off of Delo, I think was pretty big as well. So yeah, just kudos to Minnesota all around. Their contract situations make it to where they can have pretty much the same team next year. And also, if Malik Beasley has a full off season, after this year to really get into game shape and stuff, then perhaps he could get back to being the flamethrower from outside, which he's been a little bit of recently, but he had a pretty rough start to the season. So, yeah, man, it's going in the right direction. And there's always the chance of Edwards taking another jump next year, which is most likely going to happen.